You know what they say about extinct species. They should have the decency to stay dead. My name is Vorth Kalpex, Senior Archivist of the Galactic Historical Preservation Council, and I have spent the last 47 cycles of my miserable existence cataloguing the rise and fall of civilizations. I thought I had seen everything. Worlds consumed by their own stupidity, species that nuked themselves into oblivion, entire star systems that decided collective suicide was preferable to paying taxes. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what walked through my office door 3 rotations ago. Let me set the scene for you. Picture the most boring job in the galaxy. Now multiply that boredom by the square root of tedium and add a dash of bureaucratic nightmare. That was my Tuesday morning when my assistant, Blix Norvander, came scuttling in with his usual collection of anxiety disorders and coffee stains. "Sir," Blix's voice cracked like a pubescent Zephyrian. "We have a situation. I didn't even look up from my holographic filing system. If it's another request to reclassify the Denebian slug wars as historically significant, the answer is still no, Blix. Mass extinction by mucus does not qualify as noteworthy. It's not about the slugs, sir." Blix was practically vibrating with nervous energy. It's about the humans." Now that got my attention. I raised my primary ocular appendage and fixed him with what my colleagues called the stare of administrative doom. "Humans? Blix, humans have been extinct for 312 standard years. We have the death certificates. We have the obituaries. We even have the memorial plaque gathering dust in storage level 7. Blix's secondary arms began that telltale twitching motion that meant he was about to deliver news that would ruin my entire decade. "Well, sir, that's just it. They want to file a complaint about their obituary." The datapad I was holding clattered to the floor. In 47 years of archival work, nothing, and I mean nothing, had ever prepared me for a sentence that stupid. "Come again. 3 humans, sir. They are in reception area C. They say their species was prematurely declared extinct, and they would like to file a formal grievance with the Historical Accuracy Department." I stared at Blix for approximately 17 seconds. 17 seconds of pure concentrated disbelief that someone somewhere in this bureaucratic maze had allowed this situation to reach my desk. "Blix," I said slowly, my voice taking on that dangerous calm that had made lesser beings flee in terror, "are you telling me that 3 members of a species that was definitively wiped out by the Korrath Empire 3 centuries ago are currently sitting in our waiting room, filling out complaint forms? That's exactly what I'm telling you, sir." The silence that followed was the kind of silence that precedes either enlightenment or complete mental breakdown. I was leaning heavily toward the latter. Send them in. Now, I had seen reconstructions of humans before. The Galactic Museum had a whole wing dedicated to their brief but memorable stint in galactic politics. Bipedal mammals, roughly 2 meters tall, known for their remarkable ability to make spectacularly poor decisions while somehow surviving situations that should have killed them several times over. What walked into my office was different. The first one was a female, about 1.7 meters, with short auburn hair and eyes that seemed to catalogue every potential exit in the room. She moved with the kind of casual confidence that suggested violence was always an option, but not necessarily the first one. "Zara Thorne," she said, extending her hand in what I remembered was their greeting ritual. "Captain, Terran Colonial Fleet." The second was a male, slightly taller, with prematurely grey hair and the kind of smile that made you want to count your valuables. "Marcus Webb, Chief Engineer. Sorry about the whole being alive thing. I know it probably messes up your filing system." The third was another female, younger, with dark skin and an expression that suggested she found this entire situation personally amusing. "Naya Okafor, Communications Specialist. We tried calling ahead, but apparently our species doesn't have a valid phone number anymore." I sat there, mouth agape, processing the impossibility of their existence. Finally, my administrative training kicked in. "I'm going to need to see some identification." Captain Thorne reached into her jacket and produced a small metallic device. "Terran Colonial Authority credentials, issued 2 months ago." Ship registration for the TCS Phoenix, commissioned last year, and before you ask, no, we are not ghosts, time travelers, or elaborate practical jokes. I examined the credentials with the thoroughness that had made me famous in bureaucratic circles. Everything appeared legitimate. More than legitimate, actually. The security features were more advanced than anything currently in use by existing galactic civilizations. This is impossible, I muttered, running my sensory tendrils over the documents. The Korrath Empire systematically eliminated every human colony. We have confirmation reports, verified casualties. The entire species was accounted for. Engineer Webb leaned back in his chair with that infuriating human smirk. Yeah, about that. Turns out you have verified casualties, missed a few things, like the 18 colony ships that were en route to the Outer Rim when the Korrath decided to throw their tantrum. 18 ships, I repeated, feeling my worldview crumble one bureaucratic certainty at a time. 73,000 humans, communications specialist Okafor added helpfully. We have been very busy these past 3 centuries, building, growing, occasionally blowing things up when they needed blowing up. You know, typical human stuff. My mind was reeling. 73,000 humans, hidden in the outer territories for 300 years, no contact with galactic civilization, no trade agreements, no tax records, no census data. From an administrative standpoint, it was beautiful and terrifying. Why? I managed to croak. Why reveal yourselves now? Captain Thorne's expression shifted, and suddenly the room felt considerably more dangerous. Because the Korrath Empire is back, and this time they are not just targeting humans. The temperature in my office seemed to drop several degrees. The Korrath Empire had been extinct for over 2 centuries, their homeworld nothing but radioactive debris floating through space. Everyone knew this. It was filed under problems successfully resolved in our historical records. The Korrath are gone, I said, though my voice lacked conviction. The Valerian Coalition eliminated them in 2047. The Valerian Coalition eliminated their home fleet, Captain Thorne corrected. The Korrath had colonies too, deep space installations, mining operations in places so remote they didn't even show up on your precious galactic charts. Engineer Webb pulled out a small holographic projector and activated it. The air above my desk filled with star charts, ship configurations, and tactical data that made my primary stomach clench with dread. They have been rebuilding, he continued. New ships, new weapons, same charming personality. And according to our intelligence, they are planning to finish what they started 300 years ago. Your intelligence? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I didn't want to know the answer. Communications specialist Okafor's smile was sharp enough to cut through hyperspace. We have been watching them for decades, infiltrating their operations, learning their language, understanding their technology, and occasionally, Captain Thorne added with casual menace, eliminating their scouts before they could report back to the main fleet. The implications hit me like a cargo hauler at full thrust. Humans had been operating in the shadows of galactic civilization for 3 centuries. They had developed their own technology, their own intelligence networks, their own methods of dealing with threats, and apparently they had been very effective at it. I struggled to find words that adequately expressed my horror and admiration. You have been conducting covert operations against a hostile alien empire without any oversight or authorization from the Galactic Council. Pretty much, Engineer Webb said cheerfully. Though to be fair, the Galactic Council did officially declare us extinct, so we figured the whole asking permission thing was off the table. I buried my face in my hands. 300 years of careful record-keeping, shot to hell by 3 humans with attitude problems and apparently unlimited access to military hardware. What do you want from me? I asked, though I suspected the answer would involve forms I didn't have and procedures that didn't exist. Captain Thorne leaned forward, her eyes taking on the kind of intensity that suggested negotiations were about to become very interesting. We want humanity officially reinstated in galactic records. Full recognition, complete with backdating to prevent any legal complications. And, communications specialist Okafor added, we want authorization to present our findings about the Korrath threat to the Galactic Defense Council. Oh, Engineer Webb said, as if remembering something trivial, and we are going to need about 47 military-grade starships. For defensive purposes, naturally. I stared at them. These three humans, sitting in my office like they owned the place, casually requesting enough firepower to level a small moon and the bureaucratic authority to rewrite 3 centuries of galactic history. You are insane, I said finally. Captain Thorne's smile was absolutely terrifying. Sanity is overrated. Results are what matter. Before I could respond, my office communication system activated with an emergency priority alert. The kind of alert that meant something very, very bad was happening somewhere very, very close. Senior Archivist Calpex, came the voice of my supervisor, Director Zalto Grimm, and he sounded like someone had just told him his favorite tax shelter had been audited. Report to Emergency Conference Room Alpha immediately. We have a situation. Captain Thorne, Engineer Webb, and Communications Specialist Okafor exchanged looks that conveyed entire conversations in microseconds. Let me guess, Captain Thorne said, standing up with fluid grace. Korrath battleships just appeared in the Centauri system, and the Galactic Defense Council is wondering why their sensors didn't detect them until they started shooting. My blood turned to ice. How could you possibly know that? Because Engineer Webb said, powering down his holographic projector, we have been tracking that particular battle group for 6 months. We know their tactics, their weapons, their favorite breakfast cereals. We tried to warn the Defense Council, Communications Specialist Okafor added, but apparently, extinct species don't have valid security clearances. The emergency alert continued blaring, and I could hear the distinctive sound of panicked bureaucrats running through corridors. 47 years of peaceful administrative work, and it was all about to end in fire and screaming. So, Captain Thorne said, her voice cutting through the chaos like a precision laser, shall we discuss those 47 starships now, or would you prefer to wait until the Korrath finish glassing the inner colonies? I looked at these 3 humans, these impossible survivors from a species that should have been extinct, standing in my office while the galaxy burned around us. They had technology, intelligence, and apparently the kind of strategic thinking that could make the difference between survival and extinction. The choice was remarkably simple. Blix! I shouted toward the outer office. Clear my schedule and activate Emergency Protocol 7. We are about to make some very irregular amendments to the Galactic Registry. As if on cue, the lights in my office flickered, and through the transparasteel windows, I could see the distinctive energy signatures of ships dropping out of hyperspace. Big ships, unfriendly ships, ships that according to every official record should not have existed. Well, I muttered, reaching for the emergency communication console, this should be interesting. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a small voice whispered that interesting was probably the last thing any of us wanted right now. The humans, however, looked absolutely delighted. You know what I hate about emergencies? They never happen during lunch breaks. Emergency Conference Room Alpha was exactly what you'd expect from a facility designed by committee and funded by the lowest bidder. Sterile walls, uncomfortable chairs, and lighting that made everyone look like they were dying of some exotic space plague. Perfect for delivering bad news. Director Zalto Grimm stood at the head of the conference table, his usual composure replaced by the kind of barely controlled panic that suggested his political career was about to become a cautionary tale. Around the table sat the usual collection of bureaucrats, military advisors, and species representatives who normally spent their time arguing about trade regulations and lunch menus. Today they looked like they were attending their own funeral. Situation report, Grimm announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone desperately trying to maintain control. As of 47 minutes ago, 17 Korrath heavy battleships materialized in the Centauri system. They bypassed our early warning networks completely. Admiral Kes Draven, the Galactic Defense Council's top military strategist, looked like someone had force-fed her a live Zephyrian eel. Impossible. The Korrath Empire was eliminated 2 centuries ago. We have confirmation. Tell that to the Centauri defense platform, Grimm replied grimly, or what's left of it. Captain Thorne, Engineer Webb, and Communications Specialist Okafor followed me into the conference room with the casual confidence of people who had expected this exact scenario. The assembled officials turned to stare at them with the kind of confusion typically reserved for tax audits and surprise inspections. Who, Admiral Draven demanded, are these individuals? Before I could answer, Captain Thorne stepped forward with that predatory smile I was beginning to recognize as a warning sign. Captain Zara Thorne, Terran Colonial Fleet, we are the species you declared extinct 300 years ago. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the ventilation system struggling with the increased stress levels. That's impossible, stammered Councillor Bren Valdez, the Altarian representative. Humans are extinct. We have documentation. Your documentation, Engineer Webb said cheerfully, missed a few things, like the fact that 18 colony ships escaped the initial Korrath assault and spent the last 3 centuries preparing for exactly this situation. Communications specialist Okafor activated a portable holographic projector, filling the conference room with tactical displays that made everyone's worst nightmares look optimistic. We have been tracking Korrath rebuild operations for decades. They have established 17 deep space shipyards, 43 resource extraction facilities, and approximately 300 hidden installations throughout the Outer Rim. Admiral Draven leaned forward, her expression shifting from disbelief to professional interest. You have intelligence on Korrath operations? We have more than intelligence, Captain Thorne replied. We have infiltration assets, detailed tactical assessments, and complete specifications on their new ship designs. And Engineer Webb added with obvious satisfaction, we have been systematically sabotaging their supply lines for the past 15 years. The room erupted in shocked murmurs and bureaucratic outrage. Director Grimm raised his hands for silence, but his voice carried a note of desperation. Even if what you are saying is true, the Galactic Defense Fleet consists of 42 operational vessels. According to your data, the Korrath have over 300 ships. Actually, Communications Specialist Okafor corrected, they had 300 ships. Current operational strength is down to approximately 214 vessels. Thanks to our ongoing disruption campaigns, I watched the faces around the conference table shift from panic to confusion to something that might have been hope. These humans, these supposedly extinct survivors, had been fighting a shadow war for decades, while the rest of the galaxy blissfully ignored the threat. What do you want? Admiral Draven asked bluntly. Captain Thorne's expression became deadly serious. Official recognition of human territorial claims in the Outer Rim, full reinstatement in galactic records, and authorization to deploy our fleet assets in defense of galactic civilization. Your fleet assets? Director Grimm asked weakly. Engineer Webb's grin was absolutely savage. Did we forget to mention? We have been busy these past 3 centuries. The Terran colonial fleet currently maintains 87 operational warships, including 12 heavy cruisers and 3 dreadnought-class vessels. The conference room fell silent again. 87 ships. More than twice the size of the official Galactic Defense Fleet, hidden in the Outer Rim for 300 years, built in secret by a species that everyone thought was extinct. This is, Councillor Valdez struggled to find words. Highly irregular, I supplied helpfully. Also potentially our only chance of survival. Before anyone could respond, the emergency communication system activated with a priority alert that made everyone's blood pressure spike into dangerous territory. Admiral Draven, came the voice of Fleet Command. We are receiving distress signals from the Rigel system. Multiple Korrath battle groups are engaging civilian targets. Estimated enemy strength, 60+ vessels. Admiral Draven closed her eyes and looked like she was calculating how to write her resignation letter. Response time with available fleet assets? Minimum 4 hours, Admiral. Rigel Defense Force is requesting immediate assistance. 4 hours. In 4 hours, the Rigel system would be nothing but radioactive debris and the Korrath would be one step closer to the galactic core. Captain Thorne looked around the conference room with the expression of someone who had been waiting for this moment her entire life. Terran Colonial Fleet Phoenix Squadron is currently positioned in the Vega system. Response time to Rigel, 37 minutes. 1 squadron, Admiral Draven said slowly, against 60 Korrath ships. Phoenix Squadron consists of 12 vessels, Engineer Webb said with casual confidence. But they are human vessels. Communications Specialist, Okafor tapped her communication device. Captain Torres, this is Command. Execute Operation Lazarus. All Phoenix Squadron vessels. Combat deployment to Rigel system. Authorization code, Whiskey 77. A voice crackled over the communication system. Acknowledged, Command. Phoenix Squadron deploying. Time to remind the Korrath why they should have stayed extinct. The conference room watched in stunned silence as holographic displays showed 12 ships dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the Vega system. Ships that officially didn't exist, crewed by people who were supposed to be dead, heading toward a battle that would determine the fate of galactic civilization. "This is insane," Director Grimm whispered. "Sanity," Captain Thorne replied, "is a luxury we can't afford." 29 minutes later, long-range sensors began picking up the battle in the Rigel system. What they showed defied every tactical manual ever written. The Korrath had deployed in their traditional overwhelming force configuration, 63 heavy battleships, arranged in a perfect sphere formation, methodically eliminating anything that moved. It was the same tactic they had used 3 centuries ago to eliminate human colonies. Brutal, efficient, unstoppable. Except this time, the targets were shooting back. "Sensor contact," reported Lieutenant Commander Yates from Fleet Command. 12 vessels, unknown configuration, engaging Korrath forces. The tactical display showed something beautiful and terrifying. The human ships moved like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. Fast, precise, coordinated with mathematical perfection. They struck at weak points in the Korrath formation, delivered devastating attacks, and vanished before return fire could be targeted. "How are they doing that?" Admiral Draven demanded. Engineer Webb leaned back in his chair with obvious pride. 300 years of preparation. We studied every Korrath battle recording, analyzed every tactical report, dissected every strategic decision. We know how they think, how they fight, how they die. On the tactical display, Phoenix Squadron tore through the Korrath formation like a precision instrument. Ships that had seemed invincible suddenly found themselves outmaneuvered, outgunned, and completely outclassed. "Korrath fleet is breaking formation," Lieutenant Commander Yates reported, his voice filled with disbelief. They are retreating. 63 Korrath battleships, fleeing from 12 human vessels. The mathematics didn't make sense. The physics were impossible. The results were undeniable. "Phoenix Squadron to Galactic Command," came Captain Torres's voice over the communication system. "Rigel system is secure. Enemy forces neutralized or withdrawn. Civilian casualties minimal." Director Grimm stared at the tactical display like it was personally insulting him. "How?" Captain Thorne's smile was sharp enough to cut through reality. "The Korrath made one critical mistake 300 years ago. They left survivors, and survivors," communications specialist Okafor added, "have very long memories." The next few hours were a blur of emergency sessions, hastily drafted legislation, and bureaucratic panic attacks. The Galactic Council, faced with the reality of human survival and Korrath resurgence, made decisions faster than they had in the previous century. Official recognition of human territorial claims, immediate reinstatement in galactic records, emergency authorization for joint military operations, and most importantly, funding for whatever the humans said they needed to finish what the Korrath had started. 3 days later, I found myself standing on the observation deck of the TCS Phoenix, watching as the largest fleet in galactic history prepared for what everyone hoped would be the final confrontation with the Korrath Empire. 129 ships, galactic defense fleet vessels working alongside human warships, their crews learning tactics that had been perfected in 3 centuries of shadow warfare. "Nervous?" Captain Thorne asked, joining me at the observation window. "Terrified," I admitted, "but also impressed. Your species spent 300 years preparing for this moment." "Not preparing," she corrected, "surviving. There's a difference." Through the transparisteel I could see ships dropping out of hyperspace. The combined fleet was assembling for the assault on the primary Korrath stronghold, a massive installation hidden in the Void Nebula that had served as their base of operations for over 2 centuries. "What happens after?" I asked. "When this is over." Captain Thorne was quiet for a moment, watching as her people and mine worked together to prepare for battle. "We go home, we rebuild, we make sure this never happens again. And if it does," her smile was absolutely terrifying, "then we will be ready." 12 hours later, the Battle of the Void Nebula lasted exactly 43 minutes. The Korrath Empire, which had terrorized the galaxy for over 5 centuries, ceased to exist as an organized threat. Their installations were destroyed, their fleets scattered, their leadership eliminated. The galaxy was safe. But more importantly, the galaxy had learned something about humanity, about survival, determination, and the kind of vengeance that spans centuries. Humans, as it turned out, were very good at holding grudges, and even better at settling them. The aftermath of the Battle of the Void Nebula brought revelations that made our previous crisis look like a minor administrative hiccup. As Korrath installations fell and their databases were captured, human intelligence specialists began uncovering information that fundamentally changed our understanding of galactic politics. It turned out that Korrath hadn't been operating alone. "You are going to want to sit down for this," communications specialist Okafor said, entering my office with the kind of expression that suggested my blood pressure medication was about to become inadequate. She activated a holographic projector, filling my office with star charts that showed connections I had never seen before, trade routes, communication networks, and military alliances that painted a picture of galactic civilization that was both horrifying and embarrassing. The Korrath were part of something called the Hegemony Compact, she explained. Alliance of 12 species dedicated to what they call galactic restructuring. Basically, they want to eliminate what they consider inferior civilizations and redistribute resources to the worthy. I stared at the data, feeling my worldview collapse for the second time in 6 months. 12 species? Which ones? The Vorthan Confederacy, the Nexus Collective, the Iron Throne Dynasty. She listed names that made my primary stomach clench with dread. All species currently recognized as peaceful trade partners by the Galactic Council. I struggled to find words that adequately expressed my horror. This is treason on a galactic scale. "Gets better," Engineer Webb said, materializing in my doorway with his usual talent for appearing at exactly the wrong moment. According to Korrath records, humanity wasn't their only target 3 centuries ago. They were planning to eliminate 17 different species. We just happened to be first on the list. The implications hit me like a cargo hauler traveling at unsafe velocities. The Korrath genocide hadn't been an isolated act of aggression. It had been the opening move in a centuries-long campaign to reshape galactic civilization according to their twisted vision. "The other 16 species," I asked, though I suspected I didn't want to know the answer. "What happened to them?" Captain Thorne appeared behind Engineer Webb, her expression grim. "Mysterious plagues, unexplained technological failures, economic collapses that led to societal breakdown. All perfectly natural disasters according to official reports." But according to Korrath records, communications specialist Okafor continued, "All carefully orchestrated eliminations carried out by Hegemony Compact members over the past 3 centuries. I buried my face in my hands. 16 species, billions of sentient beings, eliminated slowly, quietly, efficiently, while the Galactic Council congratulated itself on maintaining peace and stability. "There's more," Captain Thorne said, and her tone suggested that more was going to involve explosions and screaming. She activated another holographic display, showing real-time intelligence data that made my worst nightmares look optimistic. The Hegemony Compact is accelerating their timeline. The failure at Rigel system convinced them that subtle elimination methods are no longer viable. "What does that mean?" I asked, though every instinct I possessed was screaming that I didn't want to know. "It means," Engineer Webb said with grim satisfaction, "they are planning to go loud." The next few hours were a blur of emergency briefings, crisis meetings, and the kind of bureaucratic panic that made our previous emergency look like a minor scheduling conflict. The evidence was overwhelming. 12 species, including several council members, had been systematically eliminating other civilizations for centuries. The Galactic Council faced a choice: admit that their entire governmental structure had been infiltrated and compromised, or, well, there wasn't really an or. The evidence was too complete, too detailed, too damning to ignore. Emergency Session 47 Alpha was called. Every species representative, every military commander, every bureaucrat with sufficient clearance level. The main assembly hall hadn't seen this much activity since the founding of the council itself. Director Grimm stood at the central podium, looking like someone had told him his entire career had been an elaborate practical joke. "Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted non-binary entities," he began, his voice carrying across the vast chamber, "we are faced with a crisis that threatens the very foundation of galactic civilization." The evidence was presented systematically. Korrath records, communication intercepts, financial transactions, a paper trail of genocide that spanned 3 centuries and involved species that currently held positions of authority within the council itself. The Vorthan representative, Ambassador Kelks Mordain, stood up during the presentation with the kind of righteous indignation that suggested he had been practicing his denial speeches. This is obviously fabricated evidence. The humans are attempting to destabilize legitimate government. His words were cut off as communications specialist Okafor activated an audio recording. Ambassador Mordain's own voice filled the chamber, discussing the elimination of the Altarian Mining Guild with casual efficiency. "As I was saying," he continued smoothly, his tone shifting to something considerably less righteous, "the Hegemony Compact represents the future of galactic civilization, a future free from the burden of supporting inferior species." The chamber erupted in outrage, panic, and the kind of political chaos that usually preceded either revolution or complete societal collapse. Representatives accused each other of treason. Military commanders demanded immediate arrests. Species that had been allies for decades suddenly found themselves staring at each other across potential battle lines. Captain Thorne stood up from her observer seat, her voice cutting through the noise like a precision weapon. Enough. The single word carried such authority that the entire chamber fell silent. Hundreds of beings, representing dozens of species, all focused on one human who had officially been extinct until recently. "You want to argue about politics while civilizations burn," she continued, her voice carrying across the chamber without amplification. "You want to debate jurisdiction while entire species face elimination. You want to maintain proper procedure while genocide is being planned in this very room." She gestured toward the Hegemony Compact representatives, who had grouped together with the kind of defensive positioning that suggested they were reconsidering their commitment to subtle elimination methods. "Here's what's going to happen," Captain Thorne announced, her tone suggesting that negotiation was not currently an option. "Every Hegemony Compact member has exactly 1 hour to surrender themselves for processing. Every species that has been targeted for elimination will receive full protection and support, and anyone who objects to this arrangement will be considered a hostile combatant." Ambassador Mordain laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "You think one species can threaten the combined might of the Hegemony Compact? We have fleets, resources, entire star systems under our control. One species," Engineer Webb said cheerfully, "that has spent 300 years preparing for exactly this situation." The chamber's main display activated, showing real-time fleet positions throughout the galaxy. What everyone saw redefined the concept of strategic surprise. Human ships, dozens of them, positioned at every major Hegemony Compact installation, not approaching, not deploying, already there waiting for orders. "How?" whispered Admiral Draven, staring at tactical displays that showed the impossible. 3 centuries of very careful planning," communications specialist Okafor replied. "We knew the Korrath hadn't acted alone. We knew there were other threats, so we prepared for all of them." The Nexus Collective representative, a being that looked like someone had crossed a spider with a tax audit, made the mistake of reaching for what was probably a weapon. He never completed the motion. Captain Thorne moved with fluid precision, crossing 15 meters of chamber floor in less than 2 seconds. The Nexus representative found himself flat on his back with a human boot pressing against his throat and a weapon he didn't recognize pointed at his primary sensory cluster. "Anyone else feeling aggressive?" Captain Thorne asked conversationally. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that precedes either wisdom or violence. Fortunately, most of the Hegemony Compact representatives chose wisdom. The surrender process took 18 hours. 12 species, centuries of hidden atrocities, and the kind of legal complexity that would keep bureaucrats busy for decades. But by the end of it, the Hegemony Compact had ceased to exist as a functional organization. The cleanup operation took considerably longer. Human intelligence teams, working with newly formed joint task forces, began the process of unraveling 3 centuries of hidden genocide. Survivor populations were located and protected. Hidden installations were eliminated. Financial networks that had funded atrocities were dismantled with surgical precision. And throughout it all, the galaxy learned something important about humanity. They weren't just good at holding grudges. They were exceptional at preparing for every possible contingency. 6 months later, I sat in my office, processing the paperwork involved in completely rewriting galactic history. The humans had integrated into galactic society with remarkable efficiency, bringing technology, knowledge, and a refreshingly practical approach to problem solving. they had also brought a level of strategic thinking that made everyone else feel like children playing with toys. "Still think we are extinct?" Captain Thorne asked, entering my office with the kind of casual confidence that had become her trademark. "I think," I replied carefully, "that extinction might be a relative concept where humans are concerned." She laughed, settling into the chair across from my desk. "The galaxy is safer now, the Hegemony Compact is gone, the hidden threats have been eliminated, civilization can actually focus on civilization instead of survival, and if new threats emerge—" Her smile was absolutely terrifying and completely reassuring at the same time. "Then they will learn why making enemies of humanity is a remarkably poor strategic decision." Through my office window, I could see ships from a dozen different species working together on construction projects, scientific research, and the kind of peaceful cooperation that had been impossible when everyone was secretly planning to eliminate everyone else. Humanity was no longer extinct. More importantly, they had become the galaxy's insurance policy against extinction, and somewhere in the dark spaces between stars, potential threats were reconsidering their aggressive intentions, because the galaxy now had guardians who specialized in impossible situations, unlikely victories, and very, very thorough preparation. The paperwork alone was going to take decades to complete, but for the first time in centuries, the galaxy had a future worth documenting,